Thanks for tuning in to Hardstone Media, where we use our superpower of hindsight to look at TV series and movies and see how they could have been improved.
Now for part 2 of The Lion of Stormwind. As they travel through the forest along the edge of the swamps, Andy continues to survey the forest around them. Bran notices this and asks, "What are you looking for?" Andy tells everyone to be silent. They continue travelling a little further, when suddenly Andy motions for them to stop. Then he notices movement around them on all three sides of the forest. The group form a semicircle with the swamp to their back. Then suddenly from the bushes a gnoll leaps at them, but is quickly cut down by Andy. Then another and another. The group fight off waves of attacks, but are overwhelmed. Andy orders them to follow him into the swamps, and they run through the mud, climbing over twisted decaying trees and leaping between patches of dry land. The Gnolls venture into the swamps behind them, but recklessly many get caught in quicksand and are dragged below the surface. The rest of the Gnolls retreat back to the safety of the forest. The group stop running and catch their breath. The same soldier that threw the rock now mocks the Gnolls' intelligence and yells back at them, taunting them. As he does, he steps in quicksand and begins sinking into the swamp. The rest of the group desperately try to save him, which they manage to do. Anduin yells at him and tells them all to keep their heads about them and keep focused about the people they need to help. Andy laments that they'll have to go through the swamps, with Gnolls waiting for them back at the forest. As they continue travelling through the swamps, the soldier accidentally steps on a log that instantly moves, slashing about in the water and pulling him under. He finally emerges, but he's screaming as a giant six-legged crocodile with a vertical fin on its back grabs him and pulls him back under. More logs begin moving towards them. The group charges through the swamps. Andy takes up the rear, fighting them off until they finally emerge from the swamps into a black, haunting forest, just as nighttime descends. As the group travels through this dying forest, one of the men touches a tree, examining its black bark, but as he does, his hand gets stuck. He breaks his hand free, but as he does, a spider's web attached to the tree sends a vibration along an interconnected network of webs. The group freeze. Then movement stirs all around them, as giant spiders emerge from their burrows and from their nests up high in the dying trees. The spiders attack from all sides, spitting venom and capturing soldiers, taking them up to their nests or down into their burrows. There's nowhere for the group to go. Andy inspires them to close ranks and fight, protecting each other, organising them for each attack. As they follow his instructions, they get the better of the spiders and end up killing them all. Bran mentions that these spiders aren't natural. Andy agrees and explains that these spiders and their webs aren't here by accident. They are a defensive trap, that they must be close to the village and the prisoners. They travel quietly through the trees towards the village. As they do, a large creature walks directly by them and stops. The group freeze. They believe they've been spotted, but then it continues on its way. The group peer through the trees into the clearing, where they see a mass of sometimes green, sometimes brown, large troll-looking creatures with large lower teeth that protrude from their lower jaw. The creatures are all moving from here to there until one of the creatures, wielding a large warhammer, approaches another and yells, "Makgora!" The rest of the creatures fall silent. Then a huge commotion as the creatures swarm from all parts of the camp to surround the two. A soldier asks Andy, "What's happening?" Andy replies, "I think it's a challenge, a duel." Andy cautiously climbs up the tree to get a better look, while Bran quietly urges him to get down. Once high enough, he sees that the two creatures are facing off against each other, ready for battle. He then turns his attention to another part of the camp, where he can see the prisoners are being kept. Andy returns to the ground and tells them that he's found the prisoners and now is their time to act. They sneak through the camp, avoiding the odd creature that isn't in the main square. As they approach the prisoners, Andy detects only 2 guards. Andy gives the word, and the group quickly but silently ambush the guards, killing them before they can let out a scream. They tell the prisoners to be quiet as they force open their cages and set them free. Andy searches frantically through the crowd, looking for his family, but as the last prisoner leaves, they're nowhere to be seen. The soldiers lead the prisoners away, as instructed. Bran asks if he found them, but Andy responds that he didn't. In a separate cage, there is a small female creature. She calls out to them, "Free me." The two are stunned. "You speak our language?" Bran asks. She confirms that she's learned from the other prisoners, but her understanding is limited. She tells them she knows where they've taken the other prisoners and can show them. Bran is suspicious, but Andy is desperate and frees her from her shackles. The creature leads them to another part of the camp, where they find Taria and Callan chained up in front of an altar. Andy's eyes light up as tears of joy begin to flow. Bran smiles broadly, then looks back as the female creature disappears. Andy begins stumbling towards his family. Then from behind a building, two creatures emerge with axes, followed by another creature in a hood. They approach the altar, ready to make the sacrifice. Andy charges at them, followed by Bran. One of the creatures swings his axe towards Taria, when Andy jumps across, blocking the axe and knocking the creature down. Bran also charges in, swinging his axe at the other creatures. After a brief battle, they kill all the creatures and free Andy's family. Andy and his family embrace, as Bran warns them that they need to leave immediately. Andy agrees. As the group begins to leave, another creature walks into the opening, holding a stack of tree branches. It looks at them with confusion. He yells out in his own language and runs. Andy turns to the others and tells Bran to get them to safety. Andy takes his sword and charges towards the fleeing creature. He runs through the camp, finally catching up to him, stabbing him in the back and silencing him. Andy sighs with relief. He begins to leave when he suddenly hears movement all around him. He tries to run, but a large warhammer knocks him down. Andy is dragged to the arena and thrown in front of a large creature with a black tattooed hand. All the other creatures look up to him with respect and fear. It is clear that he is their leader. The large creature with the black hand begins barking orders in their harsh-sounding language, pointing in various directions. Dread fills Andy as he realizes that they are sending out warriors to hunt down his family and the other hostages. Andy, on his knees, looks up at the leader and calls out, "Mak Gora." His voice is muffled, and only a few of the creatures hear it, though look at him with shock. Then he musters all the energy left within his being and yells at the top of his voice so that every creature in the camp can hear, "Mak Gora!" This time, all the creatures stop what they're doing and look back at this small, skinny animal speaking their language. Andy rises to his feet, points at the leader again, and yells, with conviction, "Mak Gora!" Excitement and amazement rushes through the camp. The prisoners are suddenly forgotten as the creatures all return to the arena. Their leader again points in all directions, yelling commands, but the spectacle of a small, skinny creature challenging their leader is a must-see event. The leader becomes frustrated as more and more creatures arrive to see the battle. Finally, the leader nods his head in agreement and takes his weapon. Andy, lost in the chaos surrounding him, is suddenly brought back to reality as his sword and a shield are thrown at his feet. Andy picks up the weapons and the two begin stalking each other, sizing up their opponent. Andy speaks to himself softly, over and over. "The longer I last, the further they get." Then the leader attacks. Andy avoids a strike and makes space between them. He continues to do this as the leader becomes enraged, swinging more and more recklessly. Andy uses his shield to deflect the attacks and keeps moving, making himself a hard target. The creatures surrounding them are fixated on the battle, but they also begin murmuring as unrest grows with their leader. The leader notices this and stops to regain his composure. He now begins to attack again, but this time with control and focus. Andy struggles to deflect his attacks and is knocked to the ground multiple times, losing his shield, but always avoiding the killer blow and continuing the fight. Without his shield, Andy realizes defense is not enough and now attacks the leader, momentarily stunning him with some unexpected blows, knocking him off balance and then striking his hand, forcing the axe to the floor. The leader rolls away from the attacks and reaches for his weapon, but as he does, the creatures that surround them uniformly emit a low growl of disapproval, and the leader leaves his weapon on the ground. Anduin attacks again. The leader avoids his strikes, but retaliates with fists, each a devastating blow if it connects. They continue fighting until the creature strikes Andy's arm and sends his sword flying to the ground. Andy scurries after it, reaching towards it, but again, the creatures surrounding them emit a low growl of disapproval. Andy stops before he picks up the blade, realizing the rules, that taking that blade would be a death sentence. The creatures cheer with excitement. The crowd is in rapture with this spectacle. Now, Andy and the leader fight hand and claw, but without his weapon, even with his wits and skill, Andy is no match. The leader knocks him into the ground multiple times, relishing in his pain and gloating to the crowd. The leader towers over him, roaring with delight, as the creatures surrounding them join in a chorus of victory. Andy looks up at the creature as he prepares for the final blow. Andy closes his eyes and thinks of his family, of them being safe. When suddenly there's a loud bang. Andy opens his eyes as a number of explosions rock through the crowd. The leader looks around with confusion as a ball-shaped object with a burning fuse rolls towards him. Andy knows exactly what it is and dives out the way. It explodes and dirt and debris fly everywhere. "Run, Andy, run!" a voice yells, and Andy doesn't hesitate, picking up his sword. Chaos fills the arena as creatures head in every direction. One spots Andy and tries to stop his escape. Andy quickly defends the creature's attack, cutting off his hand and continuing on his escape. Andy meets Bran, and they run through the forest and back through the monstrous spiderwebs. Andy asks about his family and the prisoners. Bran replies that they're well on their way to safety, that he gave them the time they needed to escape. The two charge back through the swamps of sorrow. Following their previous path, the two reach the forest, but can see some of the creatures making their way through the swamps behind them, and another group going around the swamps through the forest. Bran alerts Andy to the group. Andy looks around, trying to come up with a solution. Then he recognizes the aftermath of their earlier encounter with the Gnolls. "I've got an idea. Do you have any more of those bombs left?" Bran looks in his bag and nods. "Make sure they all know where we are," he tells Bran with a wink. "Light it up." He then reluctantly takes them out, creates a large explosion and sets a tree on fire. Both groups of creatures run towards the fire. Andy and Bran continue running over a hill and into a valley. Andy stops and examines the horizon, searching and listening for movement. Then he notices a small cave. "This is the place, let's hide." Bran looks back at him confused. "Hide? That's your plan?" Anduin smiles. "Trust me." The two rush into the cave and cover the entrance with some branches. As they do, a group of creatures, some riding giant wolves, appear over the hill and descend into the valley where the two hide. They charge through the area until one of the giant wolves stops and turns towards the cave. It sniffs the ground and slowly approaches. Then it's joined by two others, each with creatures riding on their back. Bran looks at Andy with concern and grips his axe tightly. Andy's calm demeanor now fades. The creatures get closer and are about to reveal the two when the cackles of Gnolls fill the air as a large force of Gnolls pour over the hill, down into the valley and begin attacking the creatures. A large battle ensues and chaos fills the area. Andy peeks his head out from the cave and sees a break in the battle and calls for Bran to follow him. They make a run for it, fighting off random Gnolls and creatures as they clear the battlefield and make it safely away from the two battling armies. Eventually, the two make it back to the bridge, where they again are confronted by trolls. This time, the trolls let them through, showing respect to the warriors who returned. As they return to Sunnyglade, they find the soldiers, prisoners, and Andy's family all safe and sound. Andy embraces his family, who, along with the rest of the town, can't believe they escaped. The entire town is elated. Taria asks, what do they do now? Andy looks across at the soldiers and survivors, who all look to him for instruction. He tells them all to head to Stormwind for safety, and he will join them. Before Andy and his family leave, they return to the burned down farm and sift through the rubble for anything of value. Andy pulls up the floorboards and pulls out the other bag that was buried underneath the floor, taking it along with them. The group arrives at Stormwind Castle. The soldiers report to the king and his court that they saved the hostages against some giant green trolls. The king's court laugh at them and at their tall stories, dismissing them, saying that they should leave the comedy to the court jester. Then Andy walks in, dressed in his full armour, holding his rune-encrusted broadsword. The king's court is shocked. The king tries to find words. "You've come back to my service." Andy, however, shuts down his invitation. "I'm back to save your kingdom and save the people that live within it." They laugh and the king responds, Don't tell me you believe these stories as well. Andy then throws something at the king's feet. It's the hand of the creature he dismembered whilst leaving the camp. The whole court looked down in shock. Believe it? I lived it. And we all will, unless we get prepared. Prepared for what? The king asks. Andy replies, for war. The end. Thanks for watching. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.